The iLLANOiZE app is available now on Apple and Google Play Store. Download the app, get the latest news, stream our podcasts, watch interviews, and listen to iLLANOiZE Radio live. Download the app right now. And you know what we like to do at this time. We bring you guys some of the illest guests from around the city and globe. And today we got the homie David Drake in the building.
What's going on?
What's cracking, my man? How you feeling?
I'm doing all right. We had a good reaction to the list, so I'm excited to talk about that.
Yeah, I was just saying earlier, like the cover, the graphics. I love how you guys presented it. I remember you was telling me that, you had something coming soon. I'm like, okay, cool. And I mean, me and you, I've been trying to bring you up here, and it was like perfect timing, man. Right. So let's actually, no problem. For those that don't know who David Drake is, let everybody know a little background on how you got your start in media and some of the things you've done.
Sure. So I look young for my age. I'm actually like in my mid-30s. And yeah.
That's drinking all that unsweetened tea.
That's what I'm saying. I had to switch. So yeah, I started at the beginning of the blog era. I was like writing about rap with a couple of friends on a personal blog, and it was a really cool time to be paying attention to. At that time, like everything was still in that real old school traditional way that like you heard the single when it was on TV. Like that was the only. Everybody was still just getting music from television, and there was like a few people that would be online, and they were telling you what was going on in the city. So I could go on and find some guy in Atlanta, and like the first time I heard "Icy" by Gucci Mane was on a blog. It hadn't been a radio here. It hadn't been on television yet. I found it on a blog from a guy that was just obsessed with rap music in Atlanta, and he put the stuff up and told people about it. And there was guys like that in the Bay Area and Texas, and we would like, it was kind of a cool way. At that time, like Murder Dog magazine was like the only way you could find out about stuff like that. That was like underground rap that wasn't like on television.
You taking it back. I don't even know what that is.
Right. So that was the like rap magazine for like the Midwest, especially, and the West Coast and the South, because they had a hard time sort of breaking into like the stuff that was covered by The Source and XXL.
Okay.
And the blogs kind of were doing something similar then, and like I was like also in college at the time, and we used to throw parties, and I wanted to get like records before, when you're a DJ, you just want to get the dope records before anybody. And like these blogs were helping me get up on stuff that would end up being radio hits. And it wasn't like I was like some incredible tastemaker. I just like was lucky enough to be tapped into this network that was pushing stuff super early. And so at the time, a lot of the people that were posting that stuff wanted to be writers. So it's such a weird thing to imagine now, because like nobody thinks about like writers being the ones that break music anymore. It's like streaming services, or it's DJs, or it's podcasters,
YouTube,
like YouTube, yeah. But like especially, now it's really guys that music video directors, and their channels have hundreds of thousands of subscribers, millions of subscribers, Cole Bennett or whatever. But like at the time, there were writers that were like where I could find music earliest. And so that's how I sort of got into writing and media. I was really into music, and I was writing about it anyway. And it was a totally different world then. So like it took a long time to build up to getting to writing for the places that I ended up writing for.
And that's what I was going to ask you. Like what are some platforms that you wrote for?
So by the end of the 2000s, so like 2009 or so, I was starting to write for Pitchfork. And then into the 2010s, I worked at Complex for 2 years, Complex Magazine, and I was blogging for Fader for a while, and I wrote for Rolling Stone and Gawker and just the Chicago Tribune. Actually, I started there real early, like 2006. They had me doing I was reviewing like Most Known Unknowns by 3 6 Mafia in these little capsule blurbs at the back of the entertainment section. I'm sure nobody read that.
You never know.
That's why that was like 2006. That was like when I first started writing.
So what was it like writing for so many major publications?
Well, it took a long time to get. So like, the Tribune was 2006. Now like, it's easier to get into places because there's such a need for content. Back then it was like, there's so many writers and only a few spots in the paper, so you're competing with like tons of other people. Now it's like they need so much content that a writer can be 22 years old and have written for like 6 different magazines at the time.
Right.
So it took me, by the time I got to the point where I was writing for different places, it was like right at the moment everything was changing, and right at the, like when social media, smartphones, all this stuff was changing, just this need, people are online all the time. They don't open up the paper in the morning and not read news for hours. It's like a constant, it's like Twitter now, and there's feeds. It's really hard to talk about this stuff. I feel like I'm coming from another planet because it really did change how we all like interact with news and media so much.
I mean, no, go ahead.
Do you think what you started, do you think that was like considered the foundation for freelance music writing?
No, I mean, that's always happened. It was, I would say that what I saw at the beginning of was like the internet. In terms of, I was lucky in terms of timing because I was there right when the internet had created a new lane for itself, and created a new lane where what the blogs really were was they were both distributing music and they were where you found out news and information about music. And now those are like separate entities. Like nobody gets news from Spotify, but so like there was this brief window, and I wasn't really somebody that benefited from that financially. Like Nah Right, you know, he bought like houses off of
Wow.
They used to make real money running these blogs, like because they were the place that everybody went for. Every song that leaked was like a news event, right? And
Damn, I mean, I
so
remember
it's like the blog era.
I remember seeing like owner of Say Cheese, I forgot his name, but I remember seeing him like buy a car, buy land,
Really?
like off of
crazy.
doing what he do, which is
Right.
same thing. But I want to know specifically from you,
Right.
what's the biggest change you see now, like from 2006 to 2019? What
In media or in music?
in media,
In media.
and then we'll touch music.
Yeah. It's just been totally. It's hard to. In some ways, it's a lot worse because there's a lot less resources going into like actual journalism. And so I considered myself at the time like a journalist and critic. I wasn't really like what the blogs were doing was much more like distribution of music. And while I liked writing about music critically, like thinking about why do I like this, why do other people like it, and what is the common like I hear it one way and my readers hear it a different way. Why is it that we're hearing it differently? So like explaining like how music exists culturally and personally, like how people's experiences of it are different. That was interesting to me, which is not like the way that you buy houses off your blog posts. Like that's like very like I made a lot of good friends and met a lot of interesting people, and like it's worked for my career over the long term, but it wasn't really targeting towards making a bunch of money in the music industry. So what have I seen that's changed dramatically? I would say that the entire media industry, never mind just music media, but like is struggling in a huge way. Facebook changed everything. It's sort of destroyed there used to be money that went towards people researching things that didn't necessarily make a return on profit right away. The war it doesn't matter where it is now, it's like a war anywhere is going to be you have to do provocative stories. When you're buying a whole newspaper, sorry, this is like convoluted in my head.
Go ahead.
When you're buying a whole newspaper, you get a package deal of stories that are like grab your attention, like you see a headline and you're like, I need to buy that and see what's going on. And then with that comes all these stories that are important, and the newspaper's job, their editorial job, is to curate that so that like you get the stuff that's important and the stuff that grabs your eye. But the stuff that grabs your eye only needs to be on the front page. But now every news story comes at you individually. So all the editors have to like, and this is something that I went through the grinder on at Complex, like, because that was right at the beginning of like BuzzFeed and Facebook taking over, is like every article needs to grab your attention. And what if it's a boring subject but an important subject? A lot of subjects are boring but important, like political news and stuff like that. And that's been the biggest change in media to me, is that like now we consume articles individually. We don't buy a paper and flip through it and cover all sorts of different subjects. The news is now this whatever floats to you virally and what gets to you through your peers, and it just has this real like chaotic uncertainty. And I mean, that's people are like arguing about how media's role with electing Donald Trump is all about that. So that was like in media, that's when the biggest change in my experience was. I was at Complex in New York right at the time when all of this, like Facebook was basically taking over and smartphones were taking over and totally changing the way we consume like news and information.
With that being said, do you feel like the term journalism is used too loosely now? Loosely, I mean. Maybe. I don't. In my circles, I feel like at this point it. I don't know. If I think about this in the Chicago context, I don't feel like there's absolutely people that are working hard to do real journalism at a bunch of different venues, and I feel like they do a good job with it. There's always going to be good journalists and bad journalists, like there's going to be good and bad anything, musicians, whatever. But I don't feel like there's people at this point. There was a window where it was like a glamour job to be a journalist, and I don't feel like it is anymore. I feel like people see all the firings and layoffs and stuff in journalism, and like I don't see people like using that job title to like get ahead, because it feels like a job that's kind of hurting right now. You know, like I said, there's always bad journalists, but like, yeah, I don't know. I think it's a tough time for journalism, but I think that the people that are doing a really good job are fighting really hard for it, and yeah, I wouldn't want to take anything from that, because it's an uphill battle, but for some people it's like a life. It's a career. It's a real, you know.
Do you think part of the struggle is journalists struggling to capture influence, like being digital journalists and everything? You got all these outlets such as BuzzFeed, Facebook, Twitter.
Yeah, I mean,
you got to split it so many ways.
This happens in I think this happened in every career though too. At the same time with social media, is that like the guy that is a social media personality who's willing to be like a celebrity, and this is a thing that I was never that interested in. I liked music because I like music. I like journalism because I like journalism, but I was never really the guy that like. Even though social media did create advantages for me in certain times, I was not good at. There are people that like are brands in this way that I was never really comfortable being. Like you're like able to present who you are in all these different channels, and like I was much more interested in deep diving into what I was into, and like knowing that as much as I could and doing as good a job of that as I could, and that doesn't leave a lot of time for you to like manicure your social feeds, and I think that to answer your question, yeah, I think that it has made it a lot more challenging for people that there's just a lot more competition from people that are better at branding themselves, but I think, you know, once the dust settles, like people learn the ropes, and then you just become the next. You just have to figure out your own path within that.
That's true.
Well, we're going to take a quick music break, man. We got David Drake in the building. Y'all stay tuned. Make sure to check out the iLLANOiZE playlist, in which we provide you with the latest tracks we play live on our show. Head over to Spotify and search iLLANOiZE Radio to follow our playlist, as well as follow our podcast. Now let's get back to the show.
What's up, y'all? It's your girl, Pretty Riot. Thank you so much for tuning in to iLLANOiZE Radio every Saturday from 4 to 6 p.m. And if you're watching on YouTube, you already know I'm about to tell you, hit that subscribe button and hit that little bell so that you are notified every single time we post a video. And if you are blasting us in your ears, subscribe too. You feel me? All right. So we're sitting down with Mr. David Drake. How are you, darling?
I'm doing all right.
Okay. I don't know where the accent just came from.
I thought he was going to hit you back with
I thought he was too, but it's okay.
So
So I'm curious because we follow each other on Twitter.
sure.
And like, I'm not going to lie. When Biko was like, yeah, we're interviewing David Drake, I'm like, okay, name sounds familiar. And then he goes, so many shrimp. And I'm like, oh, I know that guy. So how'd you come up with your Twitter name?
That was originally the blog that I started with my friend Serge back in 2004, I think. That was the name of the blog itself first.
and it just comes from the Pimp C lyric from Sipping on Syrup by
when he said he can get some type of
he'll get iodine poison.
Yeah, iodine poison.
And I think it was just a memorable line, and it was happening like at a time people were really like there was people that always liked 3-6, and then there was a time where people started to take them more seriously, and eventually, of course, they win like an Oscar and all that. And this was right at the beginning of this time when it was kind of cool. Like 3-6 was always hot, but they weren't cool to be into necessarily, depending on what your taste in rap was. But this was right at the moment when they were starting to be like cool in the way that would build to them. Like, and so there was another guy that I knew that was doing a blog that was called Gel and Weave. off the, you know, what song is that? There's another Hypnotized Minds.
That's unique.
The Project Pat record, right? I think that's what.
I think so.
Yeah. So this was, it was just like that was the time of it, and also it's like that's like the only good branding idea I've ever had. That's a great lyric, and any success I've had, a percentage of it probably belongs to Pimp C.
Now, and you found success in more than just journalism. Like, you also stepped into podcasting before podcasting was even as popular as it is now. I mean, how do you look at the podcast world now? And can we see you putting your foot back into those things?
Well, so I had actually done in 2012, me and Andrew Barber and Ernest Wilkins, who at that time was at the Tribune, and then went on to work for Red Bull. The three of us we actually did a podcast called Disrespectful Radio, and we interviewed ASAP Yams and KD Got Bands, and we interviewed John Carmonica from the Chicago Tribune, and from the New York Times. So like I said, Chicago. Sorry, I'm in a Chicago space right now. Carmonica from the Times, and then and so a bunch of other the rapper Tree. It was like for about a year we did that, and then I got the job at Complex and had to move to New York. Honestly, if we had stuck with that would have ended up probably being a longer term career than any of the other things that I've done. But because it was just right place, right time, right when Chicago's blowing up, and you're. But then, when I got back from New York after I worked at Complex for 2 years, and then freelanced for a year in New York, and but like all of the exciting music was kind of still happening here. I felt this was like 2015, so I moved back here and started doing So Many Shrimp Radio, which was with Charnay. That sort of ended when she moved to Texas. And also I moved, and we had been doing it out of my living room, which was fun. Like when I decided to do the podcast that way, it was like, I'm not doing this. To me, it was like I want to do it. I don't want this to feel like a job. I want to be like, I wake up in the morning and I'm like, I feel like if I'm sick and it's February and the weather sucks, I'm like, I want to still get up and do this. So we designed it. It was like we would invite friends over and we would have food and drinks and we would just hang out. And the first one was with DJ Nafis, and it was like cool. It was December, and it was snowing out, and we had maybe 30 people in my living room. And DJ Nafis is like, I'm like, I don't know how I finessed this, but I literally have DJ Nafis spinning in my living room for all my friends.
You need music, right?
It was amazing, it's like also it was great and enjoyable, like content. Like he had a bunch of one of the things that he taught me, and that was that I didn't realize this, but Bulu Master is the reason like Atlanta music took over Chicago the way it did in the mid 2000s, because when he started playing D4L on the radio, because of that. Before that, Chicago was much more of like a New York influenced city, but it was around that time that like Atlanta started to take over, and by the time like Keith and them are coming up, Gucci's like the biggest influence, right? And Brick Squad. So like that has an origin point with Bulu Master starting to spin Atlanta music in like 2005, 2006.
And look where it
Atlanta
is today.
Took over for like 5 years, basically.
Longer than that, because we still are heavily, heavily play Atlanta music on the radio.
Chicago did at least eat into that a bit though after 2010. I feel.
Think so?
Oh yeah, come on. They still play Sosa Chamberlain on the radio here. They don't play that in Atlanta, you know.
Yeah, they don't. I mean, well, actually, speaking of cities, what? So it sounds like you travel a lot. I didn't heard you say L.A. I didn't heard you say New York, Atlanta. Like, what place stands out to you the most when it comes to their music scene besides Chicago?
Besides Chicago, like right now, I mean, my favorite scene right now is probably Detroit. Actually,
Detroit.
I think it has like the most.
Is
potential.
that where Sada Baby's from?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sada Baby, and I'm counting. There's my favorite new rapper right now is this guy Rio, the Young OG, but he's from Flint, so not Detroit to be clear. But it has that like influence. A lot of the exciting music to me is coming from the Midwest still. I mean, Memphis has always been considered the South, but it's pretty Midwestern in some ways, I think. Like, it's always been a big influence on the music here, you know?
Yeah.
So Memphis is another one that I like consistently keep up with. I like local scenes in places that don't have a ton of industry tend to have more freedom and more to be creative and to try different things and experiment, and that always leads to me to more interesting music to keep up with. And it's people, especially in rap, I feel like core rap fans are like really discerning consumers. Like if shit's whack, they say it's whack. It's like there's no.
Yeah.
It's not like with. I feel like the streaming pop environment is way more like, well, if it's popular, then it's good. You know, like they look at numbers. Like even, I'm not talking about like industry people who look at numbers. I mean like fans
Like
look
the
at
general
numbers
population.
and they're like,
Yeah.
well, this one's popular, so it's good, and this one's. Whereas I feel like rap consumers are way more like critical of what, especially like regional, local scenes. They're like hard on the artists, even like sometimes too hard.
But the artists need that, though. I mean,
Right.
that's how you create talent, when you give them constructive criticism.
The feedback,
Yeah. So, and I want to bring this up too, since we're on music. You spoke on Detroit, you spoke on Memphis. Now we got to talk about Chicago.
All right.
What are your thoughts about the current music scene in Chicago?
I mean, we just spent a decade where I think we had like a massive impact creatively, and had a little bit of a rough time commercially, like capitalizing on that. I think that the thing that I want to say is that I think a lot of people have been really hard on artists here in a way that in some ways is like, all right, we want to root for people to be successful, and that means you need to make smart business decisions and et cetera, et cetera. That's always a part of it. But I feel like people were too hard, that a lot of the artists here that found success the last 10 years were pioneering ways that other people in the industry ended up learning from and like stealing from, and all just adopting to the way that they did things. And the fact is, we just had, at some level, we had bad timing. I mean, that's not really a thing. But like, we came, you know, artists arrive when they arrive, and they deal with whatever's in front of them at that time. But streaming hits in the middle of this decade, and the SoundCloud movement is really just streaming becoming a business. Like, it doesn't really have to do, it's not like Lil Pump is better than whatever came in 2012, right? Like, it's just that he was at the right place at the right time, and I'm not even taking anything from him. I think people say otherwise, but I think he's legitimately talented in certain aspects. And that he also, though, like all of us, have a luck of timing and where we are when we're there.
Now, you can't, like I said, me and you've been in talks for quite some time, and today is like perfect timing because you recently linked up with Chamika, Nayar Creates, Cam Jackson, and Chill.
That's
and
right.
You guys put together a very memorable list, 100 best Chicago rap songs of the decade.
That's right.
And for those, listening, head over to So Many Shrimps IG, where you guys can see the flyer, which was created by Ugly Trapper. The flyer by itself is very eye-appealing. It's catchy. And the way you guys did things is, I'm rocking with it, man. You could tell it was thought out. But I want to ask you personally, like, how did this 100 best rap songs come about, man?
Back when I was doing the So Many Shrimp podcast, me and Charnay and Chill had actually come up with doing something like that for the 5 years of Chicago from 2010 to 2015, and then it took a long time to put together, and time was past. It started to feel like it was going to be late, and then we couldn't agree on like what songs to focus. We needed to give it more time in the oven, I guess. And then by the time it came close to the end of the decade, there were a lot of people having arguments about Chicago. And one of the weird things is that, like, within rap, I feel like Chicago gets a ton of credit, and deservedly so, for how it influenced like the sound of rap in the last decade. But it's only like a lot of people that are in the industry who are in other parts of rap never even really got it. I can think of like, and these are guys, I'm not trying to say that they don't know what's going on in rap or whatever, but they're in super powerful positions in the industry, and it never really got to them. Chicago music in general was not really their thing. I mean, here's one that like Ebro, super influential, important person in the industry. I'm certainly not saying he's not like really hip hop or whatever, but he specifically like refused to let. He just wouldn't have Keef in the studio when he blew up. He said this like on record. He's like, I refuse to like entertain this stuff when it came out. And like, there's other guys too that just, I know that, you know, because there was never that moment where Chicago rap hit that tipping point of streams, because it came out like before the streaming revolution really took hold, a lot of people outside didn't respect it commercially because it wasn't, to them, as big as they thought it needed to be to get their attention. And so there's still this weird thing where Chicago rap exists in two worlds at once, where some people are like, yo, this was one of the most important, if not the most important rap scenes of the decade. And then there's other people who are like, yeah, there was that little moment where like drill happened and then like some stuff, and then nobody cared anymore. And we were kind of, part of doing this list was we wanted to make this argument like this was it was really an underground phenomenon ultimately, even though there was some records that crossed over. Love So was a Hot 100 record. That Chicago itself has a story that never quite got the level of attention that it deserved relative to its like cultural impact. Its cultural impact was bigger than its commercial one. So yeah. Anyway, we sat.
That's very true.
I was about to say, I like the way you just said
true.
that the cultural impact, it was way bigger than the commercial one.
Man,
wow, that just needed to be said.
Yes, it did.
Do you think that like the streaming industry cashed in on all the efforts that Chicago put in, like right before streaming took off? Because a lot of artists that came up on streaming came out like, hey, Chief Keef them inspired me. I grew up listening to
a lot of artists,
and like, I mean, like all Chicago artists really couldn't get a piece of that pie. You know what I'm saying?
When you look at a Rolling Loud lineup, and like, there's all these guys who are not as good as Chief Keef, like above Chief Keef on the lineup. And now that doesn't seem as shocking because like there's all these, now a lot of them are like superstars. But when they first broke, I remember being like, how's Lil Pump over Chief Keef as like it's just weird to me, like to imagine. Because Keef was only a couple of years out at that point. It wasn't like he was an old artist. Finito was a new song still. Like, so how is... But now I think that it's totally true that, like... I mean, here's the thing. The industry is totally built on covers and remixing stuff that should have been bigger. Like, A&R offices are full of people who are, like, finding records that should have been hits and weren't, for whatever reason. One Dance by Drake. That was a big hit in the UK, but only in the UK, the sample that they used. So Drake or his A&R, whoever, picks up that record and they're like, look, we're going to make a version of this, but done by you, and it's going to go crazy. And it does. So, like, Chicago created a massive amount of that raw material because there were so many records there that should have been huge. I'll give you an example. Millie Rock, the Brooklyn record, is a, like, flow... beat for beat remake of Beef by Lil Reese, Fredo, and Dirk. It's the exact same pattern. If you rap it in New York, Millie, whatever the fuck it is. I don't listen to Millie Rock.
2 Millie, I think his name is.
And I'm not. That's not even downing 2 Millie because that's literally the way the culture works. And there's stuff that like
Love Sosa is a flow from an old Lord Finesse record, I think.
It's a lot of cadences. It's a lot of cadences on Finito as well. Like a lot of people use Finito cadences.
Mm-hmm. I mean, look at 6ix9ine, how he blew up off our culture.
Oh, yeah.
Look at Blueface, how he blew up off our term. I mean,
and the thing is like culture works like that. Like you take from one thing to go to the next, and that's how it evolves. But at the same time, when there's all these people that don't recognize that Chicago was this big moment.
So is that really evolving then if the recognition isn't given when it's done, when it's deserved?
I mean,
I'm just, being devil's advocate.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that sometimes it happens in fucked up ways and exploitative ways. Like if people don't get credit or don't get the money that they should. But in other ways, like the way that the legal system is set up, certain kinds of lifting are totally okay. Cadences you can't really copyright.
Right.
And other kinds, melodies, you can copyright. And that has probably a very racist origin because like classical music and European music is built around melody, not rhythm, right? But like I think that all the same, like what people will get credit for, I think that's why people from Chicago are right to not be territorial about the music that we made the last 10 years, but to say, this thing had a cultural impact that's bigger than other people realize. Because you want to get the credit, but you're also not trying to fence it in creatively. I look at the reason the Chicago stuff was so shocking and interesting to people. People talk about the violence, but also musically it sounded so unique in 2012. Nothing sounded like that. And the reason it was like that was because these guys were lifting from more creative sources and doing more creative things musically, and the industry was sounding like it was repeating the same stuff over and over again at the time.
And you know what helped out with a lot of that? Like, a lot of these guys, man, when they was getting on, they were just coming outside shooting a video. You know what I'm talking about? Just telling their friends, like, we finna come out shoot a video.
Right.
Just
at their grandma's house. Like,
just make sure your stick on safety. You can't make sure that on safety.
All in front of cameraman face.
I remember when LEP was they were getting hot at that time, right before, and E had flown out, like, all these media people to come to this listening session. And I was there. Nobody knew who I was at that time. I was like I had written a couple places, but I wasn't really known. And I remember being in this building and seeing like Miss Info is there and Sway is there and all these like important media people from New York. And he's like, he took them out to dinner. There was all this work that had to go in to get that kind of attention. And I remember thinking, this makes no sense. Like, I mean, LEP are crazy talented, but like, why does someone from Chicago need to do, like, that's an insane amount of legwork to get this attention? And within a couple months of that happening is when Keith does D Gaines is 23, Keith's 16, Chop is 19. And the three of them make a video that does more streams than anything that these, like, major industry people are trying to generate with, like, this old school label way of doing stuff and how you have to come to the blogs and ask them for permission. I think part of the reason Chicago got a lot of hate, or even when it wasn't hate, when it was dismissed in those early days, was people worried about their jobs. Because like, if a teenager can shoot a video and go be famous without coming to these blogs, then what are the blogs even for?
Yep.
Big
and
facts.
they were mad about, they're worried about their jobs.
Man.
So I mean, I get that. I'm not saying like that's a totally reasonable response to have, but you can't blame the artists who had figured out a shortcut to the attention,
And they didn't even know that they figured out a shortcut. They were just having fun.
Right.
Now, I wanna jump into the top 10 on the 100 best Chicago rap songs of the decade.
Right.
Number 10, Little Durk, Bang Bros. Number 9, Katie Got Bands, King Louis, Pop Out. Number 8, Lil Reese, Fredo Santana, Lil Durk, Beef. Number 7, Spenzo, Wifer. Number 6, Chief Keef, Finito. Number 5, P. Rico, Hang With Me. 4, Chance the Rapper, Paranoia. 3, Lil Herb and Baby, Kill Ish. Number 2, King Louis, B.O.N. And number 1, Chief Keef with Love Sosa. Now, I'm looking, as soon as I came in and sat down and pulled this up, I say, why was Chief Keef's Finito number 6 and not number 1?
Because Love Sosa started the wave.
I want to ask the man that put the list.
I'm sorry.
I want to hear from the goat's mouth.
Well, there was like 5 of us having this conversation. We met like 3 times, something like that, with a whiteboard, and we're like writing down what we thought should make it and where. And that conversation definitely happened. And actually, Cam Jackson was. I pretty much agreed with him. So Finito to me partly feels a little bit of a prisoner of the moment thing for us, because that was like when Keith was super underrated. 2014 in the mainstream, people were treating him like he was done, like it was a shortcut thing. And that was when he got dropped from Interscope when he had Finito on him. Mm-hmm. If Interscope realized Finito was a hit, I don't know that they would have dropped him like that. Like, that record was a major comeback for him, and it became almost like the Too Short. What's it called? Blow the whistle. Blow the whistle. You know what I'm talking about? It was like a culture record more than it was like a culture hit, not a radio hit. Like Finito never got real radio play outside Chicago, and even then only like Power, I think.
And they really honestly they mainly played the remix
of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
which had that weird beat because they lost the file. Keith lost. I think somebody might have stolen the files to the Finito beat. That's why the beat sounds different on the remix. If you listen to it, it sounds like different.
It gave a great backstory. I did not know that.
I heard that from Sosa's team, actually.
Oh, wow.
So, anyway, Finito, I feel like there's a big... It became like a... it's one of those national... Everybody claims it now.
And then it went viral, too.
Yeah. Several times.
Yeah.
Many times, yeah.
I mean, people fell through the floor. Literally fell into basements from that joint.
I remember shout out to Law Cannon and Hoop Dreams at College Craze, and Hoop Dreams played Finito.
They broke that.
For sure. That was the best Chicago moment of my high school career. No, I was like in college.
Of
the decade, but it was bussing. Like they played that, and it was bussing. The whole room was. Everybody was dancing. Like everybody was dancing, and at that moment, it literally went viral. And Keith retweeted it on Twitter, and it was just like.
See the stories behind Finito. That's why I'm like, crazy. Yeah. That's why like me looking at it, I'm like, how was Finito not number one? So, when you broke it down on a cultural like I understand that. Of course, it didn't receive much commercial play. Of course.
Well, I'm not saying that against the. That's not an argument against Finito. So far, I feel like I've almost been just arguing for Finito to make it.
Oh, so we on the same page.
Yeah. Like I don't think from the commercial aspect is it really. I do think so. There's one example. So Don't Like is the one that a lot of people in the mainstream that stopped paying attention. That's the one for them, and we felt like that was like. First of all, it was back when a lot of people were saying like Chicago was just doing Atlanta, so why is this different or interesting? And Don't Like still kind of sounds like Lex Luger to me, and it's got a little bit of that like. That chiming like Lex sound from and they were listening to that stuff, so it makes sense. But I remember I was interviewing Project Pat. This was like 2012. This was for Complex, and I remember him telling me that Love Sosa was the moment that he knew that Keith was not like it wasn't a flash in the pan. Like this was a kid who knew how to like write records. And I also think that Love Sosa being more of like a Memphis influence record showed that Chicago wasn't just Atlanta. Chicago has influences from all over, and we were listening to music from Memphis, and we were listening to music. Keith used to flip like DC, like Fat Trell kind of DC records. He used to. There was a song he did with
Blood Money.
Yeah, that's actually built off though a guy that was in Fat Trell's camp had like this. You can find it on YouTube. I think Keith was he is a huge like rap nerd at the end of the day. He was listening to music from all over the country, and I think part of the reason he's the one that broke through, people don't credit for this, was he understood music on a very deep level and like was listening to records not just from Atlanta and not just from New York or L.A. I mean, there's a viral thing of him singing the YG Toot It and Boot It video.
He was doing songs with Andy Milonakis and Riff Raff. Right. You know what I'm saying?
He listened to tons of different kinds of music, and I feel like that was like a sign that Chicago wasn't just new Atlanta. Chicago was like its own animal entirely. It was like it wasn't just building on one place. It wasn't just derivative of one thing. It was its own mix. It was Louis used to call it. He's like, the music I make is a gumbo. It's like stuff from all over the place. The Money Dance was the
the Josephine Johnny dance from. Do you remember that song? Mm-mm. I'm old.
Hey, you look good for your age, though. I'm trying to tell you, it's that iced tea, man.
The unsweetened tea. I'm telling you.
I mean, before we wrap things up, I was doing some research. So I searched drill music. Wikipedia pops up, right? I go in there, scroll down to history. Guess whose name I see?
It's my name.
Yes. The very first thing I see on the Wikipedia for drill music is David Drake of Complex Rights. I'm like, hold up. So, I mean, that was that's crazy to see that, you made a push for that genre when other people looked at it as it's not going to do anything. But you actually took time out and you really did your research and you pushed a lot of artists from Chicago on multiple platforms. So I want to ask you, how do you feel? No, I'm not going to say that. Do you feel you helped in a way?
I have very complicated feelings actually about that entire thing. And it's like, I mean, you could make a book out of something like that. Like it's because drill has it is not like it is so complicated. I trust me that I have thought about this millions of ways, talked about it with tons of different people. I think that ultimately I didn't think of it at the time. I was not pushing anything. Like I didn't think of myself as being music industry. I didn't think of myself. I consider myself a journalist, and I was reporting on a real cultural phenomenon that was happening. And I was doing it by talking to the people that were there on the ground and getting feedback from them on how it happened. And of course there is anytime you cover something that's outside of a mainstream thing, you're promoting it at some level. But I always treated it, to me, it was like, this wasn't a thing where I'm trying to do PR for any of these artists. And even then, whatever I've written about any of these guys, Keith didn't even follow me back on Twitter. Never mind, I didn't get... I never saw myself as a friend of the artist. That was very important to me, was that I was doing this because I felt like it was an important story and that I was trying to tell, and I wanted to tell as truthfully as possible, especially because it was such with the violent aspects of it and everything, it has such potential to be an exploitative thing. And of course people did end up exploiting it. And I do actually also blame a lot of the... there were a lot of places that they shunned it, and I think that ended up being just as bad as the places that took it serious, or worse than the places that took it seriously sometimes, but the places that exploited it. That you only create a DJ academics if places that should be covering that music don't cover it, which is what happened. After the drill flash in the pan happens, all these major publications are like, well, that was a moment, and now we're moving on. But they didn't realize that so many people in music, all the new generation of artists, are listening to these artists and care about. Cardi B was just on recently saying this. Mm-hmm. She's like, that was our era. She didn't say that was my favorite music. She said that was my era. Meaning Chicago wasn't just a place, it was a time, a decade. It was and I feel like I remember hearing stories Fredo came the first time he went to GCI with Andrew Barber and Tony Sco. This is back 2012 again. He brought this CD that he wanted them to play on the air of his song. Fredo had it written in marker on the CD. It said "Gang Bang," and
that was my joy too.
That's dope. But Andrew's like, they're not going to play this on GCI. And the thing is that there were a lot of people in positions that could have helped these kids. So if you're talking shit.
Go ahead.
You're talking about this other gang on the air. The radio can't play this stuff. You got to there's things you can do to get played on the radio, but you've got to consider what we our side of this. And they could have helped these kids break commercially in a way that would have helped make the music, help make the artists more responsible and not just more responsible, more aware of that they had to be responsible. And I think there were a lot of ways in which people failed that generation of artists. And then, so what happens is you end up with platforms like academics, which people say, exploits the scene, but there wasn't another platform doing what he did.
You're right.
and like that's not good. Like
it's not, because to look at how he profited off of it and look at where he's at off of exploiting our style of music. And then he didn't even do it in a way that represents us.
Yeah.
He did it in a way where it helped him out, and he would cover it as breaking news in a bad way.
And pretty much mock it.
Yeah, and that's why he has his.
That's why don't nobody like
Chicago don't really. Yeah, I don't even think he was at Complex Con this year.
He knew better.
He worked for Complex.
Yeah, I don't think he
but
was
he
at
knew
Complex
better.
this year.
He knew better. He wasn't gonna come to Chicago.
his success though points to like how commercially the Chicago scene created so much of what rap is now. That Cole Bennett is the biggest videographer in rap in terms of commercial scale. He's from Chicago. His first artist that broke him really was Famous Dex. It wasn't Cole helped Dex too. There was like a trade-off there, but without Dex there's no Cole, and without Chicago drill that's what Dex came out of. And I think that happens over and over again, and that was what we were trying to like talk about with that list. I think was like, so there has to be some recognition of how diverse the music here was, because when people outside think of what drill is, they think of like kill shit basically. But Chicago has a very wide sound, and drill had a very wide sound, a lot of different influences and styles and approaches, and we wanted to capture that, like to show the real range of it, and also to not segregate drill from the rest of Chicago, because once that starts happening, it really becomes everybody tries to make drill into this thing that's like basically evil, and like those early drill artists were, that was like the violence was a part of what they did, but it wasn't the whole of it. And I think that once you start segregating, even like saying like, well, Chance isn't really, that's a different thing. But Chance's music addresses the same issues and talks about a world that is related to drill music blowing up a year earlier than he did, right?
So in his own form.
It's all related. You can't I think that once people started cutting it to drill being this uniquely evil thing, it became a stigma that all these other people made money off of by being the opposite of that. I'm not like those mumble rappers who rap about shooting people, and it's like, well, lots of drill rappers aren't rapping about shooting people, but
they talk about certain things that people may
that
not
are
be comfortable with,
and that are happening in the world they're in. But like,
so let everybody know where they can find you. If you have any upcoming, I guess anything upcoming, like any more projects coming, let the world know, my brother.
I mean, I've just been sort of working behind the scenes lately. I'm not really doing much in the way of journalism or criticism anymore. I am on Twitter and Instagram at So Many Shrimp, and that's basically it. I'm easy to reach if you got questions for me or whatever, and I'm definitely happy to like. I would say that my one piece of advice to anyone who's trying to do, and this is true of I think music industry, but especially journalism, is like, if you become an expert on something that you are passionate about and no one else cares about, when that thing becomes a story, you become the person that people want to talk to about it, and that's always better than trying to chase what's hot and trying to chase what's like you don't actually care about that much, but it seems like other people do. That a lot of any success that I've had, relative and modest success that it is, has been me spending a lot of time on stuff I cared about that I felt like deserved the love and attention and passion that it wasn't getting at the time. So